It all started on a regular Tuesday morning in downtown New York City. I had just gotten off the subway, heading to my office in the financial district, when I saw a text message that changed everything. My parents, who had always been my biggest supporters, had sent me a message. It wasn't just any message. It was a warning, a declaration of war, a lawsuit. They were suing me for everything I had: my apartment, my savings, my car, and my business. The business I had built from scratch. They wanted it all. I couldn't believe it. The world around me seemed to freeze in that moment. I stood there on the crowded street, my mind racing. How had things gotten so bad? Just a few years ago, I was their golden boy. I had worked hard to make them proud, to build something of my own in the heart of the American dream. And now, they were standing in front of a judge, demanding I hand over everything I had worked for. It was surreal. My parents had always been a symbol of strength for me. They were the ones who had given everything for me, sacrificed their dreams to make sure I had a better future. But as I read through their message, I realized that this wasn't about love or sacrifice anymore. This was about control. This was about them not being able to let go of their hold on me. Even though I was a grown man, running my own business, living my own life, the lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was deeper than that. It was about their inability to accept that I had outgrown them. I had stepped out of the shadow of their expectations, started a company in Silicon Valley, and found my own path. But they couldn't accept that. They still saw me as their child, the one they controlled. They were determined to take everything I had, everything I had worked so hard for, to maintain that control. As the court date approached, I felt the weight of their accusations pressing down on me. I had to defend myself, not just against their lawsuit, but against the years of emotional manipulation they had subjected me to. How had I allowed them to have this much power over my life for so long? And why, despite everything I had achieved, did I still find myself seeking their approval? I knew I couldn't give in. I had built my business from nothing. I had fought for every success, every victory. And now, I had to fight for my future, for the life I had created. I wasn't going to let them take it from me. But I needed more than just my will to win. I needed something they hadn't expected. I needed to fight back with the truth. As the lawsuit continued, things only got worse. My parents were relentless. They had hired the best lawyers, and they were doing everything they could to break me down. Every hearing, every meeting, every legal document they sent felt like another punch to the gut. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was personal. They wanted control. They wanted to tear apart everything I had built, everything that had given me the freedom to live my life on my terms. The stress was unbearable. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that I was about to lose everything. My apartment, my savings, my business, everything I had worked so hard for. It felt like I was watching my dreams slip through my fingers. But what hurt the most was the way my parents had changed. The people who had once been my greatest supporters, my pillars of strength, were now the ones trying to destroy me. I couldn't understand how it had come to this. How could they do this to me? Had I really become such a disappointment to them, that they wanted to take everything I had worked for? I tried to tell myself that it wasn't personal, that they were just angry, that they didn't really mean it. But deep down, I knew better. This was no longer about money. It was about their inability to accept that I had moved on, that I had built something on my own. At one point, I considered giving in. I thought about just handing over everything they wanted, just to make it stop. I could feel the pressure building, crushing me from all sides. But then, I remembered something. I had worked too hard to get here. I had fought for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. No matter how painful it was, I couldn't back down now. I had to fight, but I knew I needed something more than just my own determination. I needed leverage. I needed to expose the truth. I needed to show the court that this wasn't just a fight over money. It was a fight for my future, for my life. And that was when I realized what I had to do. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I had one card left to play, and it was going to change everything. The day of the hearing arrived, and I felt like my whole world was crashing down on me. I couldn't stop the pit in my stomach, the feeling that today would change everything. The courtroom was filled with tension, and as I walked in, I could feel the eyes of my parents and their lawyer on me, watching my every move. But there was something different this time, something I hadn't expected. My parents were no longer just accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. Now they were going for the jugular. Their lawyer had produced a series of fabricated documents, claiming that I had mismanaged funds from my business and had hidden assets from them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were accusing me of fraud, something I had never even considered doing. I looked at my parents, wondering how they could do this. How could they lie so easily, all for the sake of money and control? The pain of seeing them turn against me in such a cold, calculated way was unbearable. But I knew I couldn't back down. I had to fight. I looked at the judge, trying to remain calm. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about my integrity, my future, and the lies my parents were spreading. The accusations were wild, and I had no choice but to defend myself, even if it meant bringing everything to light. I stood up and asked the judge for a moment. I had to show him something. The judge looked at me with a raised eyebrow, but I could see that he was intrigued. I had no idea what kind of reaction I would get, but I knew this was the moment. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the document. I had prepared a document that would reveal the truth about everything. The room fell silent as I handed the judge the paper. It wasn't just a simple piece of evidence. It was the key to unraveling the lies my parents had told. The judge took the paper, scanned it, and then looked up at my parents. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They didn't know what I had just handed to the judge, but I did. I had them. I could hear the rustle of papers as my parents' lawyers scrambled to react. But it was too late. The truth was out. The judge leaned forward and addressed my parents directly. This court has just been presented with evidence that shows fraudulent activity on your part. The court will now be taking further action. The weight of those words hit like a ton of bricks. My parents, who had once been so sure of their victory, were now the ones who had to face the consequences of their actions. As the police entered the courtroom to take them into custody, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of something I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of. As my parents were escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted permanently in my life. The immediate relief I felt was mixed with an overwhelming sadness. Yes, I had won, but at what cost? My family, the people who had been with me since the beginning, were now the ones who had to face the consequences of their actions. I couldn't understand it, but I knew that I had done the right thing. The months that followed were a blur of legal battles, media attention, and a deep sense of betrayal that I could not shake off. I was thrust into the public eye, with reporters constantly hounding me for interviews. Some asked about the legal case, others were more focused on my personal life. I tried to keep my head down, but it was impossible. My life was now an open book, and everyone wanted to read it. Despite the chaos, I found a small comfort in knowing that I had done everything I could to protect my future. The legal case was finally over, and the court had ruled in my favor. My parents were ordered to pay restitution for their fraudulent activities, and their reputation had been permanently tarnished. They were no longer the people I had once looked up to. But that didn't mean I didn't mourn the loss of the family I had once known. What hurt most was the lack of an apology. They never acknowledged what they had done to me, never apologized for the years of emotional manipulation and control. Instead, they remained bitter, refusing to take responsibility for their actions. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, they would come to understand the gravity of what they had done. But that hope was quickly dashed. I spent months processing everything. The shock, the anger, and the heartbreak. It was difficult, but it forced me to look at my own life and what I truly wanted from it. The battle had shown me how far I had come from the person I had once been. The young man who had been afraid to break free from his family's expectations was now someone who could stand up for himself, who could fight for his own future. And in the end, I realized that I had gained something far more valuable than money or material possessions. I had gained my freedom. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I would have to rebuild my relationship with my parents, or at least try to. But for the first time, I was no longer the person they could control. I was free. As the weeks passed, I tried to get my life back on track. The emotional toll of everything that had happened was immense. And it wasn't just the legal battle. It was the sense of betrayal I felt from the people I loved most. My parents had been the ones who raised me, taught me right from wrong. And yet they were now the very ones trying to strip me of everything I had worked for. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape from. But life had to go on. My business was growing, and I couldn't let the past drag me down. I threw myself into my work with an intensity one had never known before. Every new deal, every new client, Every new milestone became a reminder of what I had overcome. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was forging a new path, one where I was in control. But the more successful I became, the more I started to feel the weight of the emptiness in my heart. I had everything I had worked for: success, money, freedom, but I still felt something missing. The void my parents had left in my life couldn't be filled with wealth or business victories. Despite everything, I found myself reaching out to them. I wasn't sure why. I knew they had betrayed me, that they had lied to me and tried to destroy everything I had built, but there was still a part of me that wanted things to go back to how they used to be. I was desperate for their approval, their love, or at least an acknowledgement of what I had accomplished. I remember one day, after a long meeting, I sat in my office looking at my phone, debating whether I should call them. My business was thriving. My life was moving forward, and yet, there was still a part of me that felt incomplete. The relationship I had once had with my parents seemed irreparable, but I couldn't shake the desire to rebuild it. I picked up the phone and dialed their number. My hands trembled as I waited for the ring. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This could either be the beginning of healing or the final end of any relationship we might have had. The phone rang twice before my father answered. "Hello." His voice was cold, distant. My stomach dropped. I could feel the years of tension in that one word. "I wanted to talk," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I've worked hard to get here, and I've learned a lot. I just wanted to say, I hope we can put the past behind us." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then he spoke. "You've made your choices. There's nothing left to say." The finality in his words hit me harder than I had imagined. In that moment, I realized that I was never going to get the closure I was seeking from them. I was never going to get the approval, the apology, or the love I had hoped for. They had made their peace with their decision, and now it was time for me to make mine. As the call ended, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. The past was over, and I had to let go of the hope that things would ever be the same. But even though I had to let go, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I had fought for my future, and I had won. I no longer needed their approval to feel complete. I was enough. Months passed, and though I was still recovering emotionally from the trauma of the lawsuit, life was slowly moving forward. I had rebuilt my life, my business, and had started to trust myself again. My company was thriving, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control. But despite all the success, something kept nagging at me. I thought that once I had overcome the battle with my parents, everything would feel complete, but it didn't. I began to notice how disconnected I had become from everything around me. My friends, who had always been there for me, started to fade into the background. My colleagues at work were supportive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was alone in all of this. I had made it, yes, but at what cost? Was I so focused on winning the battle against my parents that I had forgotten what it meant to have real connections with others? One night, I was sitting alone in my office, reflecting on the journey I had been through. The success, the money, the freedom, everything I had fought for felt empty, without someone to share it with. I thought about my parents, about the love I had once felt for them, and how it had all turned to ashes. I thought about my childhood, my dreams, and how all of those things had been shattered by betrayal. It was then that I realized I needed to make a change. I couldn't keep living in the past. I had spent so much time focusing on the pain of my parents, betrayal, that I had neglected the relationships I had with others. I needed to rebuild not just my career, but my life, my personal life, too. I needed to reconnect with the people who mattered most and begin to rebuild the trust that had been lost along the way. The next morning, I called up my closest friends, the ones who had supported me even when I didn't deserve it. I told them I wanted to make things right, to rebuild the relationships I had let fall apart. I reached out to my colleagues, the people who had stood by me through the most difficult times, and told them I appreciated their support. Slowly but surely, I began to reconnect with the world around me, taking small steps toward healing the wounds I had ignored for so long. But there was still one thing left. I hadn't fully forgiven my parents. It was hard to imagine ever truly forgiving them for what they had done to me. But deep down, I knew that the only way I could move on and truly heal was to find it in myself to forgive them, not for their sake, but for mine. Holding on to that anger and resentment was only hurting me. It wasn't an easy decision, but I called them. I hadn't spoken to them in months, and honestly, I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I had to say something. When my mother answered the phone, her voice was tentative, as if she wasn't sure how to approach me anymore. "Hello," she said, her voice soft. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I just wanted to tell you. I'm trying to move on. I don't know if I can ever forgive what you did, but I need to let go of the anger. I want to move forward. I'm done being angry." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. Then she spoke. "I know I've hurt you. I'm sorry. We were wrong. I don't expect you to forgive us, but I want you to know that I regret everything. I don't want you to carry this pain anymore. I'm sorry, son." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of release. I had been holding on to so much anger, so much pain, and hearing her apology made me realize that it wasn't about them. It was about me. I didn't have to carry their mistakes anymore. I didn't have to hold on to the past. I could finally let go. It wasn't the perfect ending, and I knew that it would take time to fully heal. But that conversation was the first step toward rebuilding not just my future, but also my relationship with my parents. They had hurt me, but I had the power to decide whether I wanted to let their actions define me forever. The months that followed were full of personal reflection and growth. I had learned a lot in a short amount of time. The legal battle, the fight with my parents, it had all forced me to grow, to adapt, and to become stronger. But as much as I had grown professionally and emotionally, there was still something missing. I was starting to realize that success and money weren't enough to bring me true happiness. It wasn't about the size of my company or the balance in my bank account. I had everything I thought I wanted, yet I still felt incomplete. One day, as I was sitting in my office, reviewing contracts and handling business operations, a thought crossed my mind. Was this it? Was this all there was? I had achieved what most people could only dream of, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lacking in my life. I had been so focused on building my empire, on proving myself to my parents, that I had neglected the things that mattered most: relationships, meaningful connections, and the simple joys of life. I began to reach out to the people who mattered to me, the ones I had neglected in my pursuit of success. I started rebuilding friendships, reconnecting with old friends, and spending more time with the people who had always supported me. It wasn't easy. The damage done by my obsession with work and my strained relationship with my parents had left its mark, but I was determined to make things right. One evening, after an exhausting day of meetings, I took a walk through Central Park. The city was bustling, but I felt a sense of calm as I walked through the park, away from the noise and chaos of the business world. I realized that I had been chasing after something that was never going to bring me true fulfillment. My wealth, my success, it was all meaningless without the love and support of the people around me. I had to let go of the past. I had to stop trying to prove myself to everyone, especially my parents. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me and the life I wanted to build for myself. I needed to focus on what really mattered: the relationships I had with the people who truly cared for me, the life I wanted to live, and the happiness I had neglected for so long. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer be driven by fear or by the need to prove myself to anyone. I would live for myself. I would focus on the things that brought me joy, the things that made me feel whole. It was time to stop looking backward and start looking forward. As time went on, I began to realize that no matter how far I ran, the past would always be a part of me. My parents had left an indelible mark on my life, both good and bad. But the most painful thing was that no matter how much I succeeded, no matter how far I climbed, I still felt an emptiness that I couldn't fill. I had spent years fighting for approval, fighting for love, and now that I had it all, I realized that I was still missing something deeper. The pursuit of success had blinded me to the simple pleasures of life, to the connections that truly matter. One evening, while walking through the streets of New York City, I had an epiphany. I had everything I could ever want: wealth, a successful business, recognition, but what good was it if I had no one to share it with? The years of sacrifice, the long hours spent away from loved ones, had taken their toll. I had neglected the relationships that mattered most. I had distanced myself from the people who had been there for me in my darkest moments. And now, as I looked around, I realized that I had nobody to turn to for emotional support. The emptiness was overwhelming. Despite all my achievements, I felt completely alone. The people who had always been my foundation, my friends, my family, were now distant memories. The ties that once bound me to them had snapped, and I had no idea how to rebuild them. I had fought for financial freedom, for success. But now I realized that the true freedom I sought wasn't financial. It was emotional. I needed to reconnect with the people who mattered, to rebuild the trust and love that had been lost. It wasn't easy, but I decided to make an effort. I reached out to old friends, to people I had once cared for but had drifted away from. I made amends with those I had wronged, even if it meant swallowing my pride. I apologized to people I had hurt in the past, and slowly, I began to rebuild the relationships I had let slip away. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but I could feel the walls around me starting to crumble. Then came the most difficult part. I knew I had to face my parents again. I wasn't sure what I was expecting: closure, reconciliation, forgiveness, but I knew that I couldn't move forward without addressing the unresolved tension between us. I reached out to them, not out of a desire for validation, but because I needed peace. I needed to forgive them, and I needed to be forgiven. The phone call with my father was awkward at first, filled with silences and hesitant words. But eventually we talked. We talked about the past, about the mistakes we had made, and about the pain we had caused each other. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. My father apologized in his own way, and though I didn't expect everything to be healed in one conversation, I felt a sense of release. I didn't need their approval anymore, but I didn't need to let go of the anger and resentment that had been poisoning me for so long. It wasn't just a conversation. It was the beginning of healing. We weren't going to be the family we once were, but we were going to be something new, something built on understanding and forgiveness. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally at peace. Months had passed since my conversation with my parents, and while the pain of the past still lingered, I began to feel a sense of healing. I was no longer weighed down by the anger I had held for so long. I had found peace with what had happened, but peace didn't mean forgetting. The scars remained, but I had learned to live with them, to let them shape me into a stronger, more resilient person. With my personal life on the mend, I began to shift my focus back to my business. My company was thriving, and I was more determined than ever to make it the best it could be. But this time, things felt different. I was no longer working for validation. I was working because I had a purpose. I wasn't just building a business. I was building something that would last, something that would make a difference. But even as my business flourished, I realized that success alone wasn't enough. It was the relationships I had with the people around me, my friends, my colleagues, the people who had supported me through thick and thin, that truly mattered. I was no longer focused solely on achieving financial success. I wanted to build a legacy that was about more than just numbers. I wanted to leave behind something that would make a positive impact on the world. I started investing in causes that mattered to me: education, social justice, and environmental sustainability. I used my success to give back, to support initiatives that were making a real difference in people's lives. I found fulfillment not in accumulating wealth, but in knowing that I was helping to create opportunities for others. I had learned the hard way that success without purpose was empty. One day, while meeting with my team, I shared my vision for the future of the company. I wanted to focus on more than just profit. I wanted to create something that would leave a lasting impact. The room was filled with a renewed sense of excitement. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was leading a company with a soul, a company that was about more than just business. It was about making a difference. As we set new goals and created plans for the future, I realized that I had finally found the balance I had been searching for. Success, true success, wasn't just about what I achieved on my own. It was about what I could achieve by working together with others, by using my resources and influence to help those who needed it most. The fight with my parents, the betrayal, the pain, it had all led me to this point. And now, I was ready to face whatever the future held. As the months passed, I began to notice something in myself that I had never experienced before, a sense of inner peace that seemed to come from within. It was as though the struggles, the battles, and the pain I had gone through had finally settled into something solid and real. My business was booming, and while I no longer cared about the external validation I had once sought, there was something more satisfying than wealth and success: an inner fulfillment. My focus was no longer on simply surviving or proving myself. I had gone through so much just to get to this point, and I had learned the true meaning of freedom. It wasn't about the money or the accolades. It was about the life I was living and the choices I was now able to make for myself. The journey had shown me that success wasn't just about what you achieved for yourself. It was about how you could impact the world around you. I continued to pour my heart and soul into the business. But this time, I was doing it for a different reason. I wasn't working to impress anyone, not even myself. I was working because I genuinely believed in the potential of my company, in the vision we had created. The mission had changed, and so had I. I wanted to create something that wasn't just successful on paper, but that would leave a real legacy. One afternoon, while reviewing our progress and future goals, I had a realization. The world wasn't perfect, and there was still so much to be done. But I felt a deep sense of responsibility to do my part. My company could be a vehicle for change, not just profit. We had the power to make a difference in the communities we served, and it was time to shift our focus from just business growth to meaningful impact. The challenges from the past were no longer holding me back. I had learned to forgive, to let go of the anger and resentment that had clouded my heart for so long. The process of healing had taken time, but now I felt like I was truly living. And as I thought about the future, I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't going to be defined by my past mistakes or my parents' betrayal. It was going to be defined by the choices I made from this point on, choices that aligned with the values I had come to cherish. With this newfound clarity, I expanded the scope of my business to include social initiatives that focused on education, mental health, and providing opportunities for underprivileged communities. I was using the resources I had gained to give back in a way that aligned with my new vision of success.